Welcome to 28 Days and Beyond, where we reflect and celebrate on our history, our heritage, our culture, in our own authentic voice. And I'm your host, Alexander Evans, with my co-host, Amari Johnson.
What's going on, man?
Man, we ready to dig right into it.
All right.
So now there's been a plethora of black actors in black films and different kind of genres. What's your perspective when you see this plethora? Do you think it's too many, not enough, or just narrowly defined?
I don't think it's necessarily. There's always been, you know, black actors. There's always been a lot of black movies. I think you're right. In the mainstream, we're starting to see a lot of folks coming in. Not really move one way or the other. Some of the stories are good, some of them aren't. You know, it's kind of simple as that for me.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because when we see certain movies, and certain movies when people win certain awards, it's always that defiant or that always narrowly defined, like Denzel Washington Training Day.
Yeah, King Kong ain't got nothing on me.
Ain't got nothing on me. That used to be a drink where I came from.
Oh, really? Where are you from?
Brooklyn. But now you have, you know, Moonlight, one of the flicks, and that's getting away. Here's the other thing. Another thing that has been, well, a couple things. I think with the plethora of movies and plethora of entertainers, now the roles are being a little bit more wide open.
Got you.
It's not me a gangster, me the drug dealer, me the rapper. You know, Will Smith movie where he was a struggling father, you know, and with his son.
What was that? A Pursuit of Happiness.
A Pursuit of Happiness. So you're starting to see, you know, those kind of movies, Hidden Figures, the Untold Stories. That comes to mind. But some of them, you know, some of them difficult to watch.
Like which ones?
The ones that deal with slavery.
Oh, that's a rough one for you.
That's a rough one.
Why is that?
I gotta be in the right spirit.
Oh, is that right?
It's just
talking about I ain't going to work on Monday. I don't want to see
no
white people.
I'm going to work. I may be mad, but I'm going to work.
I remember that's how people talk about after they saw Rosewood. They said, "I'm not going to school."
Yeah, that was right.
I ain't going to school tomorrow. Yeah, but you know, I mean, but right. We're seeing a lot of these movies. We're seeing my thing is ultimately, you know, is representation enough? You know what I'm saying? So, you know, black people fighting to get on TV. They get on TV, but they represented as a bunch of clowns and, you know, thugs and criminals. And they say, okay, well, we want more, we want more. I definitely think one of the great things that's happening is because of, you know, advances in technology, right? People have access to more resources that allow them to create their own films, tell their own stories that are high quality, right? And then also have a platform to distribute those things that isn't necessarily dependent upon the approval of somebody who may or may not agree with what you're going for. So that's definitely an upside, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's why one of the reasons why we shameless plug do 28 days, because we got to control those narratives and how we want to be seen, and how we're not monolithic in thought or perspective, or we don't always agree, or we don't always have the same viewpoints of things, even though there's some commonalities.
Yeah, certainly so. Today we're joined by Kamili Feelings, who is a performer and actor, and the list goes on and on and on. And we're going to jump into some of these issues about the sort of representation of black actors, the roles that are available to us, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned on 28 Days and Beyond.
And also at the moment, there's a debate going on about the lack of black actors in Hollywood. Do you think that the film has helped to put that to the forefront, get people talking about it even more?
Lots of black actors in Hollywood, they're just not working. You know, they're not getting the opportunities to make the good stuff. And so the fact that we're talking about diversity and representation and equal inclusion is vital and important, and I'm glad that the conversation is being had.
And what do you think about it?
What I think about it?
Yeah.
Well, I think there needs to be change. I think there needs to be an opening up of the industry to include more voices. The question isn't why isn't Selma getting a quadrillion nominations for this and that. The question is, why was Selma the only film that was even in the conversation to get one? Where are the Latino people? Where are the LGBT writers? Where are the women? Where is the array of voices? Why only one voice, one gaze to be celebrated? That's the real question. And so until we answer that question for ourselves and until we make that answer be something different, then we'll be having the same old tired conversation next year and the year after. So the hope is that maybe this triggers real change. We don't know. It remains to be seen.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond, and on the set with us we have Kamili Feelings. Welcome to the set.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Can you share your experience as an actor? You have a wide variety of things you have done in that role.
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't start out as an actor. I took a 3-month course when I was down in South Carolina.
Okay.
And that got me on a trek towards being able to figure out how to write. I was writing fiction at the time. and I found I had a voice for dialogue. And my experience with the little short acting workshop course helped me just figure out what I wanted to do. Because I was always interested in drama. I didn't know if I had any facility at performance. And the workshop just got me on the right course to just being able to say, so dramatic literature, theater is what I want to do. But I spent a lot of time writing. The first 10 years out of that 20 years I've been performing. So the last 10 years I've been a little more dedicated to performing. It's a unique kind of situation though, because I don't necessarily have the actorly career path. So I haven't come out of a conservatory where you're forced to kind of go after any role. So my relationship to what's available is always about, I'll look for this particular role if there's an August Wilson play, for instance. August Wilson's a black playwright who did a lot of plays, I guess just ranging from the the beginning part of the century to the end of this last century. And, I was very interested in doing his plays. Lorraine Hansberry, a guy named Charles Fuller who did Soldier Story. So I got a chance to do all of those plays, except Lorraine Hansberry. And I always had a lot more options as far as, I won't go out for roles. The other thing is I'm not that particular kind of performer. There's certain actors who just love performing. They jump into a role, feel it, and they love being somebody else. Me, I can play an actor with an accent, but it's not necessarily, some people you can just feel like they're salivating when they're speaking another tongue or kind of performing in another way than what they usually are. I'm somebody, I probably maybe have a little bit too much ego for that. And I'm a little bit more conservative, so I like to save energy and try and figure out what's going on in a moment, a theatrical moment or a dramatic moment. Doesn't help me in auditions sometimes too, so I get some roles, sometimes I don't. I've been very fortunate to get a lot of the roles that I've wanted, and if I didn't get the role, somebody cast me in some other role. So I've been very fortunate in that way, so my perspective is based on being an outsider, but sometimes in.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about, because obviously a lot of times we hear the struggles and the plight of black actors is that, I'm thinking of Hollywood Shuffle. It's a Robert Townsend movie where, they say we're going to teach you how to, hey, my man, anyway. Right, but you know what I mean? But they're saying they've been typecast, okay. Basically they see the same actors at the same auditions because everybody's auditioning for the same roles.
Sure.
That hasn't been your experience.
No, and I don't want to speak for those people, like I said, who salivate around jumping into any role. Because now what happens now is, especially in theater, they say it's written for any actor. What they mean is usually, whether it's written by a black writer or a white writer, is it started out as a white person, and then it could be anybody else. It could be any other ethnicity, which is lovely. I guess. I'm not that kind of actor who wants to fit into a role that wasn't designed culturally for me. But there's some actors who just fill it up with their cultural perspectives and cultural persuasion. So they fill it up in some way that you go, wow, I couldn't imagine this being anybody else but a black person, and specifically that actor. Because I'm not that kind of actor, it makes me a little bit more hostile to the idea of trying to squeeze into a role. I just auditioned for something recently, and it was clearly written for two white women who have this relationship with this black man, friendship, and he's happened to sleep with both of them. And they slept with each other back in high school or whatever. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to start telling a more complicated story around why am I in this all-white school? Why did these two girls become friends with me? I'm supposed to be some sort of jock. So it becomes really interesting if you're interested in telling that story. Some people just fill that story up with their own language in some ways too. It just feels like unnecessary storytelling for me. And it sometimes doesn't fit, it just doesn't fit. And I suspect that sometimes the reason writers do this, they give certain actors the right to be multi-ethnic, is because, and this is a larger question of representation, is that sometimes the role is softened or not as significant or is meant to be a fulcrum for the other actors to define themselves.
Got you, yep.
And that's the way this particular role was. And I was anxious to do it because I wanted to challenge myself in some way, but I haven't really felt that need to challenge myself in the way that I guess actors coming out of conservatory are always challenged to do that. You remember Zoe Saldana, this actress who was cast in Nina Simone?
Right. Oh, yeah.
I felt her pain as far as the empathy for actors who are always challenged to make something out of something that's very difficult to do, just from a perspective of her being a light-skinned person, very phenotypically different from a very dark-skinned person with more African features, I would say, just even stereotypically so. And so they darkened her up, and she made these mad faces. No disrespect to the actress who's trying to do this, but it's an unnecessary challenge for, I think, a black actress like Zoe Saldana to try to do everything. And I think actors feel that challenge and almost feel a sense of ego around it, as opposed to saying, I can't do that. I can't play Nina Simone.
Give it to somebody else. Quick question. I know
Yeah, please.
Amari got something.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
people pick you just for your voice, man? Like, I hear that voice. 'Cause you got a good voice, but
You know what? That's a
I
good
got my
question,
man card
man.
too, so don't worry about
I
that.
know, that's but I always think about that because my father has the same voice, my brother has the same voice. Anytime we pick up the phone, somebody thinks I'm my father or my brother.
Yeah.
So I like that about it because it's an inheritance, but I can't take any pride in it, because it's just somebody else's voice that just handed down to me.
Now, one of the things that it sounded like you were implying was obviously certain actors, you were mentioning conservatories in particular, but when we come back from the break, I want to hear what you have to say about, because it seems like there's also a sort of desperation from certain actors who need to be out there and need to get these. So when we come back on 28 Days, we'll be joined by Kamili Feelings, who will continue this great conversation.
We come from a time when there were no opportunities at all for blacks in television, front of the camera or behind it, until now we see in many places opportunities for blacks to express themselves or to be included in the mix, the American mix, which is as it should be. There is still, I think, behind the cameras, where decisions and policy and all those things happen, a dearth of representation of blacks and minorities and women. We've got to do something about that. And there is still, in some aspects of what television has as its staple, not a sound representation of what America is about. There's a lot of talk nowadays about the gradual disappearance of blacks from certain types of television shows, and that is true. My hope is that will be corrected. I think it will be corrected by the fact that we blacks in our buying habits, have $500 billion a year in our pocket, and television and all these people out trying to get that money. I don't think they're going to go too far away. We'll have to remind them that we're there. But I think once they remind us, oh yeah, I think they'll come around and respond. I hope so.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond with Kamili Feelings, and we're going to dig a little deeper. Mark, pick up where you left off at.
So before the break, we were talking about, different roles, and it's, forgive me if this is inaccurate, but it seems like you have a certain luxury to be able to choose which roles, you know what I mean? Because we know about the starving actor who has to take anything that's available to them. They're always on call,
Yeah.
Speak a little bit about that.
Well, I've been lucky. I've been able to teach. I've been very fortunate in the sense there's always some lily pad that comes up so that I don't have to depend on performance alone. And that's probably spoiled me for the last 20 years, 15 at least. And then the last 10 years I've been trying to selectively pick projects that would work best for me. It's but I don't want to dismiss the people who I've mentioned before. We're very excited about jumping into any role, because I'm sure if they've done 10 to 12 roles that weren't necessarily designed for a black actor and they've made it their own, they have specific issues with having done that, and saying, finally, maybe being angry and saying, I would love somebody to write a black role for me from start to finish, as opposed to having to shape the role around my performance and then make things work that weren't supposed to work for a black actor. So I'll leave that for them to talk about at some point, and I can only speak from my perspective. But I recognize the dilemma because I've had fellow actors who have that situation going on all the time. But I recognize, because I'm a black actor and I can watch other people in terms of the struggle, there's always some storytelling things that are always problematic. And again, we're in the era of Obama now, where one black man, and I've been a one black guy in a sea of other white people for a long time, so that one black guy being able to work dynamically with almost an all-white cast has become something that's a new narrative. And so putting it into films and putting it into television it all of a sudden has a new dynamic that didn't work in the 80s when you're like, what is that dude doing here? He can't be here for a reason other than just you need a black person.
But if it was a horror film, you know he's about to die.
He's about to die, exactly. Right?
You know what
So the new thing is he's brilliant or he's very individualistic. I remember the guy who did the TV series Atlanta,
Yeah.
Donald
Yeah.
Glover. He was in, it was one of those films. It wasn't Gravity. It was one of those space films. I think it was The Martian.
All right.
And he was the smart guy and he came
That's
and
right. That's
solved
right.
the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Didn't necessarily have to be integrated into the cast in any way.
Yeah.
He just was this smart guy, and he was the Obama substitute, right?
He fulfilled the diversity quota.
And I would guarantee that was written for a white guy, but then they said, "Why don't we put this guy in here? It'll be great."
Timeless.
Right? Exactly. And again, it's supposed to be a noble. It's supposed to be a noble part. But one questions whether you're just left isolated in the same way we are socio-politically half the time. So yeah.
No, that's deep right there. Where are you about to go with that though?
I think there's something beyond social and political, something beyond even just the arts, and there's something that's not our problem, but we take it as our problem, and sometimes we personalize it. And I think there's something to be said for not personalizing a general disinterest in our welfare, and in particular our suffering. And I saw this film, Hidden Figures, recently, and I saw it with a white couple. And we were both interested, all three of us were interested in going to see something that would uplift us in some way. And since I'd heard from a lot of black women that it was an uplifting film, I was very anxious to see it. And I came away very sad. Why was I sad?
Yes, why?
I saw it too, man. I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, but I was sad because I was struggling to define the sadness and the anger I felt. Because I as a black man have learned over 44 years now how to figure out how to go from, instead of just going to anger, to allow myself to feel the sadness before I start getting angry. And luckily, I've got some what I call white allies around me who I think love me personally. I don't know if they love blackness in general, but I think there's a hostility towards blackness that's undefined, and I think white people have to do the hard work emotionally of defining what that is. They can articulate why they can explain why maybe this black guy got shot, but in general, the number of black people getting shot by cops or getting shot by citizens is an inarticulatable thing. And so they feel an emotion around it, which is probably associated with guilt or shame, but don't want to define what happened prior to that, right? That anger that makes you go, he should have been shot. And now I've got to circulate a way of figuring out why he should have been. And that hovers around the shame, that hovers around the sad anger quotient too. Why are cops immediately going into a defensive posture of anger? Why is somebody trying to justify Hidden Figures as a film that has both white people and black people doing good things? One of the things I had a problem with, even with something like Birth of a Nation, this film that came out about slavery, we sometimes take on the white narrative of, I need to justify why I need to fight against slavery. I need to kill people, but I need to make some egregious things happen. The fact of the matter is slavery was what it was.
Yeah.
I can see my wife raped daily and go, this ain't right, but I'm so used to it because I've seen my mom raped and I've seen my grandmother raped. Then something happens, and this is where it becomes much more philosophical, almost metaphysical, right? Where you have to start going, all right, something is going wrong with our ability, I'm talking about black people, to be able to not take on white people's shame and anger and their suffering around feeling bad for hurting us. And you start to kind of demand your own space, your own narrative, because you don't have to justify murdering white people who are enslaving you. But in this narrative, you did.
But then that becomes a fundamental challenge. If you're making a film for a wide audience, the fact is, because you're right. I mean, I often say it all the time. Black people don't have to. We can see roles that are considered to be, coonery, but for us, we know that doesn't represent us.
Yes.
But we say, we know there's white people watching, so we say, oh man, this is degrading, this is demeaning. But the fact is, white people have the ability to be individuals, black people don't, right? We know that. So I say that in relation to that particular story that you're mentioning.
Sure.
That we have to demonstrate to another audience why it's justifiable to kill the slave owner.
Interesting.
Now, if we were telling this story, to ourselves, we would know. We wouldn't even. We say, yeah, we're going to kill the slave owner, and we're going to kill everybody associated with the slave owner. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So how do we overcome that psychological barrier right there, particularly through the stories that we choose to tell?
We've been enslaved 300 years roughly, and we've been free for about 150 years roughly.
Free?
That's about half, yeah, well, relatively speaking, right on paper. And I think that's only half the time. And I think there's, Kobe Bryant has proved it. If you put a lot of time into something, you can become you can be very good at it, right? And I think, 300 years is a lot of time to overcome. And we're dealing with generations who are still getting bombarded with images and negativity that developed from slavery. Yeah.
Mighty feelings. Wow.
Yeah.
We'll be back with our final thoughts.
As I'm sure you know, there's a new Ridley Scott film coming out called Exodus. The posters are already starting to appear. It opens over the Christmas period. Now, I haven't seen the film yet. Generally, I'm a fan of Ridley Scott's movies, but you may have heard that there's been a controversy about the casting of Exodus. It's a complicated story. The short version goes something like this. Ridley Scott has been accused of racism for using white actors in the lead role of his movie. This was written by David Dennis Jr., who's a writer and editor, and he claims that not only are all the main characters white, but the servants, thieves and assassins are played by Africans. This is cinematic colonialism and racist as Now, a quick look at the cast list will tell you that Christian Bale plays Moses, Joel Edgerton plays Ramses, and Sigourney Weaver plays Queen Toya. These are indeed the lead roles. However, Ridley Scott has answered those accusations by saying the following in an interview with Variety. He says, "I can't mount a film of this budget where I have to rely on tax rebates in Spain and say that my lead actor is Mohammed so-and-so from such and such. I'm just not going to get it financed, so the question doesn't even come up." Recently, Joel Edgerton has weighed in with his own contribution. He says, "It's not my job to make those decisions. I got asked to do a job and it would have been very hard to say no to that job. But I do say that I am sensitive to it, and I do understand and empathise with that position." So where do you stand on this? I haven't seen Exodus yet, and I imagine that you haven't either, but does it matter to you that Ridley Scott has indeed cast white actors in those lead roles? And does his argument about financing cut the mustard? See, I'm generally a Ridley Scott fan, but I have to say, I find his statement very problematic. The camps, meanwhile, are becoming more and more entrenched. There is currently a very strong online movement to boycott Exodus the movie. Where do you stand? Will you go and see it, or do you think it's a problem? From my point of view, I think that Ridley Scott, in answering his critics, has actually made things worse.
We're back with 28 Days and Beyond, and we are here with our final thoughts. Kamili, you said something that was interesting. You were just talking about your white allies, and a part of it was talking about separating you from your blackness. Can you dissect that?
I'll try to. And I'm a big guy for aesthetics, because sometimes I feel like our solutions to socio-political problems are just not enough. And I've been reading about these guys, they're considered Afro-pessimists. And they use a term that's really helpful for me when I'm dealing with being in this sea of whiteness sometimes, being a black person, the one black guy. And that's the sense of my backstory is not so interesting to people. Like my oldest brother's in prison, and he's been in prison for almost 20 years. He's 60 now, and it's all for drugs. Now drugs that are now being seen by people who are actually taking them now is majority white people as something to be sympathized over, right? And I think 80-something% of the people who get caught with drugs are drug possessions as opposed to drug dealers, right. So I think the idea of that there's been some criminalization of black people in the past that my allies don't necessarily want to deal with, and so they're not interested in my eldest brother at all, even though he's been in jail and I've mentioned it to him. And so it's almost like I can't deal with that shame. I have to really focus on you. And that's what we have in film and TV and theater sometimes, is I'd rather deal with the personal conflict because the largeness of who you represent. And I could be lighter than I am. It's just my background is not, it's too provocative for an audience of white people who are waiting for a performance from you. And it's very difficult a lot of times to perform.
So if we are defining, we define racism generally, most people on the street would define racism as hurt feelings, not as structures. Well, if racism is about hurt feelings, then that means I can confront my racism by taking you on as an individual, not your backstory, not where you come from, not who you're associated with. But if I've learned how to get along with this one, so right, I'm confronting my racism.
And the family situation is a perfect way to be able to talk about that, right? Some people are defined by their personal family situation that doesn't go beyond a nuclear situation. Whereas some of us have a lot of very complicated blended families, and so it's not as simple as that, right? Or we have family that makes us feel ashamed because they've done something wrong or they've done something this. And what a friend of mine did, she's a critical writer, and it was Caretha Mitchell. She says, I don't take any of the shame. You tell me that this person did something wrong, I don't take that. I just look at you and stare at you.
Yeah.
She gets accosted by white professors in her hallways, and they say, what did you do to make this guy so angry? She never says a word. She just says, he stepped up to me and almost spit on me. And she doesn't say. And I said, look, slavery was such a thing where you could get knocked upside the head for just having a straight back and clean white teeth. So it's an interesting trajectory for us to go on.
Certainly so. Kamili Feelings, we want to thank you so much for joining us on 28 Days and Beyond, where we reflect on our history, our heritage, our culture in our own authentic voice. Until next time, peace.